Hello, dear folks. Welcome back once again to the watchdog of LA City. So it's Jack Square, the constant show of the bi-weekly. And we're talking about taking a peek into the city council, into the activities of LA, of Los Angeles, together with my partner, Mr. Jack Humphreywell. And he's a famous watchdog of LA City Councils and LA City activities. So Jack, once again, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
Okay. And I feel especially honored to be the same Jack, okay, spelled the same way, same thing, being a watchdog, one of the watchdogs. So, and once again, it's time for us to bring the day-to-day for the past 2 weeks about the LA City activities. What has struck me so much is the latest situation, I call it a movement, about LA city workers who are attempting to put up a strike. So, Jack, we need a bigger picture about the whole thing, please.
Well, you know, it's interesting and it's constantly evolving. The first thing you have to recognize is that the city just doesn't have a whole lot of money. You know, they were projecting it.
That we know for sure.
Yeah, right. Well, there's never enough money for them.
There's never enough, but you know.
But you know, the city looks and has a deficit every year, and which they have to manage, or a shortfall, as they like to politely call it. And so there's just not a lot of extra cash going around. And even more so is when you put that into the context that we have our streets and our sidewalks are a mess, and that, you know, our pensions are $12 billion underfunded.
Okay.
So what's happening now is that the city has said, and this fellow named Miguel Santana, who's the chief administrative officer, and Mayor Eric Garcetti, and members of the city council have told the civilian workers, the coalition of city workers, that there's no money and that they're not going to get any raises. And furthermore, they would like them to contribute 10% to the cost of their Cadillac health care plan. These are very, very generous health care plans. And obviously, you know, the city coalition of city workers, the civilian workers, not the cops and not the firefighters, have said, you know, we're not doing this. And so they're at a stalemate. And so the civilian workers are talking about striking, and in particular the sanitation workers are talking about striking. Yet, you know, it's sort of interesting. The other day, I guess it was on Saturday or Sunday, there was an article in the Los Angeles Times that talked about how well paid our city workers are relative to other workers for other governments, as well as private enterprises. I mean, huge differentials, and that didn't even take into account the Cadillac health care plans or the fat pension
plans. The health benefit, the pension, the retirement, everything. Right?
Yeah, so you know, it's an interesting one, and so you know, you have the unions that are, you know, yelling and screaming, and they have a lot of clout at City Hall, in large part because they've helped finance the campaigns, political campaigns, for a number of people that are on the city council, who are also, just so happen, you know, making decisions with regards to these pay contracts.
I see.
So it's an evolving situation, and I think that it's evolving. And
the whole thing, Jack, I have a question regarding America City's statement the other day, the previous Monday, saying that we are putting the recession back to our rear view mirror.
Right.
Which means that we are okay now. Could that be the factor that triggers or at least helps with the attempt of the strike, of the request of the raise? Could that be?
Absolutely. The previous projections that the city had were whatever they were, but it turned out that the actual amounts that they're thinking they're going to get this year are going to be substantially higher, probably, you know, and so revenues out of these various taxes are going to be about $300 million higher, 6% as opposed to 3%. So this coalition of city unions are saying, well, some of that's ours. And
All right.
that, but that's not, that really, that's very deceiving in that the city had to close a budget of budget gap of 165 million. We have our streets and sidewalks that are a mess. We're underfunded on the pension plans.
Yeah.
Plus there's a whole bunch of other things that Mayor
And
Garcetti would like to
our
do.
libraries, our schools,
Our
parks,
Yeah, there's all sorts of things.
infrastructures,
Yeah.
all sorts of.
They want to fix. There's all sorts of things that are there.
Yeah, it took me quite a while studying the statement made by Mayor Garcetti, talking about the promising the good present status quo,
Right.
and the bright future. Yet he failed to mention about the part that you mentioned.
Right.
Right. In the whole speech, is there anywhere he mentioned about the problems we still have or the problem we're still heading?
Well, there are some mentions of it. For example, the city is talking about they have a sidewalk plan now, which was part of a settlement of a class action lawsuit. And under that, the city's supposed to spend next year $31 million for the next 5 years, and then it's about $1.4 billion over 30 years. But that doesn't get us to the place where our sidewalks are going to be in good to excellent condition. It's just general maintenance. So, but all the guys at City Hall, all the people at City Hall are dancing in the streets, giving each one high fives that they fixed the sidewalk problem, and they haven't.
Yeah, that probably is a good and a vivid description about.
And then the other thing about this sidewalk plan is that there's a priority of where the money's going to be spent. And the first tier, right at the top, are going to be the city-owned facilities. So if you're in front of a park or a library or City Hall or some kind of city-owned building, those are going to be the first that are going to be fixed. And that's understandable. I can stand. But in terms of, the people, the residents of this city, we're last in line. We're after, hospitals, we're after businesses, we're after, commercial corridors and retail corridors. So we're last in line. So we're not, we the residents of Los Angeles, we the guys that are paying the taxes aren't going to get, aren't going to get anything for the next 25
So my question
years.
is there any kind of a criticism about the mayor's statement, and I call it a State of the Union of the city, in recognizing the status quo, the bright future, and failed to recognize our problems?
Well, I think there is some criticism of it. I mean, I think the Los Angeles Times, our local newspaper, and the Daily News, which is out in the Valley, have not necessarily endorsed the mayor's plan. We're going into, the city council is going to be having budget hearings starting, I think, later this week and go on for a couple of weeks. But those are just going to be cursory. They're going to say, well, we ought to maybe spend a little extra money here and take it away from that. And it's the budget's pretty well set. I mean, they've negotiated this, the mayor and the various members of the city council. I think that one of the biggest problems here is that nobody trusts City Hall. And so our streets are still going to be a mess.
All right.
Our sidewalks are a mess. Our parks are a mess. Actually, one of the nice things that show you how bad things were, the mayor's has a $1 million program to clean up our restrooms at our parks. I mean, they stink. I mean, literally stink. And
so there might be different elements that forms altogether these problems of nowadays. Number one, the previous mayorship, during that kind of administration, there are failures and the leftovers, so on and so forth. And number two, being a bad time, problems are expanded, are enlarged to another or bigger magnitude, something like that, right? Now that Mayor Garcetti being so optimistic about the problem he's facing, though, and yet his failure to recognize his problem as the LA's problem of the shortfall of the fundings. And on the other hand, we're facing a big cause of increase backed up by the threat of a strike. So it's critical, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
critical rather than optimistic.
It's interesting. I think Eric Garcetti has identified some of the problems, but not necessarily in his State of the City speech. And I don't think he addressed it in his budget. There's just the biggest issue from my perspective is that there's just no long-term planning as to how are you going to run the city.
Let me borrow a quote from your article that you published on the LA Watchdog. Says, yet Garcetti failed to mention the city's flawed finance that are characterized by a structural deficit where expenditures increase faster than revenue.
Minor problem.
That's that's a profound, the root problem.
Absolutely.
Right, the root problem. Like it seems like you're running a household. You always want to make sure the least ends meet. If not with some surplus, right? Now you followed to say, following that, you said that the 700 million accumulated deficit over the next 4 years.
Right.
Right, and the more than 25 billion in the unfunded pensions and the deferred maintenance of our streets, sidewalks, and the rest of our deteriorating infrastructures. So it seems that the article that you wrote on the Watchdog says it's clearly what the problem we have so far.
Right. Well, you know, the city every year says they have a balanced budget. Well, you know, that's true, but it's like if you're a house, if you own a home, you're not fixing your roof, you're not fixing your gutters, you're not doing anything. The house is running down,
Okay,
and that's
sure.
what we have
You're
here.
okay. You're okay for the day. How about 5 days later? How about 5 years later?
Yeah.
How about 25 years later?
And to a certain extent, it's just not Garcetti's fault. I mean, you had Mayor Villaraigosa for 8 years, and we had a recession, but he sort of fiddled while Rome burned. We had Jimmy Hahn, who was only there for 4 years. Reardon, I think, made a difference, and then we had Bradley for Tom Bradley for, I don't know, 20 or 24 years, and things just deteriorated. And people weren't willing to take tough stands. One of the things I think is going to be very interesting is, when the city starts to address how they're going to fix our sidewalks and how they're going to fix our streets, is whether they're going to have that done by city workers as opposed to independent contractors.
All right. Speaking of city workers who are threatening now to put up a strike, should we stand a strike or should we capitulate? I don't know. Nobody knows at this present time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll pick up from there. So stay with us.